and welcome to City Council's Public Safety Committee hearing to discuss proposed amendments to the Solicitation Section of the Columbus City Code. These amendments are intended to deter those who purchase sex from doing so in our community through diversion programs designed to reduce recidivism and increase penalties for repeat offenders. For years, enforcement and penalties have disproportionately focused on sellers rather than buyers in the sex industry. We must correct these inequities while offering support to those who may be victims of human trafficking. We begin today's hearing with Columbus City Attorney Melanie Tobias and Columbus Division of Police Deputy Chief Jen Knight. Later, we will hear presentations from City Attorney Michael Albritton, Officer Ken Lawson, and City Attorney Heidi Carr. I say thank you to my council colleagues who have joined. I see Priscilla Tyson, thank you. And with that, Deputy Chief Knight, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Brown. I appreciate everyone's time today. The city and the division have been striving to create a city free of human trafficking, and we have recognized that that goal requires a resource-based approach to treating victims, but it actually also necessitates a comprehensive plan for demand reduction. The penalties we impose on individuals that are purchasing sex in our city reflect our priorities as a community. And to properly address demand, we have to ensure that we have reasonable penalties for buyers, as well as a mechanism to provide intervention that can potentially identify and address root causes of the behavior. Prostitution-related offenses are one of the biggest complaints that we receive from citizens in Columbus communities. We as the Division of Police have a duty to address an issue that visibly impacts so many neighborhoods. But prostitution is actually a symptom of greater problems, including addiction, poverty, trauma, and mental health issues. And we have to address this problem comprehensively. It cannot be resolved merely through enforcement. And we have some alarming stats that support that on this issue. I'll just give those very briefly. In Columbus, over 90% of individuals engaged in prostitution-related offenses are being trafficked by another person. Ohio ranks 5th in the nation among states that have perpetrators and victims of human trafficking, according to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. The mortality rate for women engaged in prostitution is 200 times greater than the average person. Most common causes of death are homicide, suicide, and substance abuse. The penalties for buyers have been limited, and there is quite a disparity between the supply and demand penalties. In 2018, the average fine for these individuals soliciting a prostitute was $74 and no time in jail. There's a disparity in the socioeconomic status that's very obvious between buyers and sellers. A high percentage of buyers have private attorneys, where the sellers rely exclusively on court-appointed representation. Average fines for those charged with selling is well over $100 and multiple days in jail. The impact is much greater for them. While buyers bond out immediately and rarely are held in jail overnight, women are either bonded out by their traffickers and sent directly back to the street to recoup that loss, or they're held as a result of prior pending charges that are typically directly tied to their situations. So how does this legislation help address demand for solicitation? It focuses on identifying demand as the driving factor behind this issue, and it actually labels the offense as sexual exploitation. So we are separating supply and demand, not just by name, but by penalties. By instituting real penalties that make it more difficult for buyers to hide their behavior in the shadows, we are making steps forward. For too long, victims were the public face of this issue, and they're treated like the cause of this problem that impacts neighborhoods, but they're a symptom. By addressing repeat offenders for the demand side of the equation in a meaningful way through penalties, these will reflect our goals. And by building in opportunities for programs like John School and therapist-led treatments for offenders that will address the root causes of behaviors that drive this offense, we can actually make a real move towards reducing demand in Columbus. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Melanie Tobias. She's going to give an explanation of the proposed amendments. And we worked very closely with the City Attorney's Office. They've been a tremendous support. So Melanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Might, Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Tyson. So when you look at the proposed ordinance, what we have done is split soliciting offenses into two different separate ordinances. Previously, if you were charged, if you were a buyer of sex or a seller of sex, the John traditionally or a prostitute, you were charged under the same code section, and the penalties for that charge were exactly the same. So what this has done is split it up, as previously alluded to by Deputy Chief Knight, and there are now two separate ordinances. One would apply to the buyer of the sexual activity, and one would apply to the seller of the sexual activity. I will note for City Council that this mirrors changes in Ohio law. So the Ohio General Assembly has been working on this issue similarly to the city, and they passed in January a House bill that did the same thing. It split up the state code soliciting statute into two separate statutes, one addressing buyers, one addressing sellers. So a large part of the proposed ordinances will mirror what is in the state statute. That state statute change, that goes into effect in the middle of April, and that will become state law. Where the proposed city ordinance differs from the state statute on the same thing is in the penalty for the buyers. So the proposed ordinance 2307.231, sexual exploitation, this applies to anyone that is buying sexual activity. And if you are convicted of this as a first offender, it is considered an unclassified misdemeanor. It carries a fine of up to $1,500 and up to 180 days in jail. If you are charged and convicted again of this same code section or the corresponding state code section or any other sex offense under Chapter 2907 of the Ohio Revised Code, for instance, loitering or pandering, engaging in prostitution, any other similar sex offense, and those are outlined in the proposed ordinance. If you're charged again and you have that prior conviction, then your penalty is increased. So if you have one prior conviction, then in addition to the $1,500 fine and up to 180 days in jail, there is a mandatory fine that the court doesn't have discretion over. They must fine the offender $550 and they must impose a 10-day jail sentence. It could be more, up to 180 days, but it's a minimum mandatory jail time sentence of 10 days. If you look at subsection C of the proposed ordinance, if the offender has more than one prior conviction under this code section, the similar state code section, or anything under the sex offense code, chapter 2907 of the state code, then the penalties, the minimum penalties increase again. It's a mandatory fine of $800 up to $1,500, but the court must impose at least an $800 fine, and they must impose at least a 15-day jail sentence. Again, it could be up to 180, but it must be at least a minimum of 15 days. So as you can see, what it does is just, if you keep getting caught engaging in this behavior and convicted, then your penalties that you face, regardless of what the court wants to do, the city council and the ordinance provides that your penalties must increase every time you're sentenced. The second part of the proposed ordinance changed, 2307.24. This again mirrors the state code, and it is a soliciting prohibition for sellers of sexual activity, so the prostitutes. It is still a first-degree misdemeanor offense. The proposed change does not change the level of offense. It does not carry the increased penalties. So this is how it differs from the sexual exploitation ordinance. It does not have increased jail time or mandatory minimum fines for subsequent convictions like the sexual exploitation ordinance does have. And that is how we are addressing the difference between supply and demand and attempting to treat the buyers of sexual activity differently and more harshly than the sellers of sexual activity. You will note in the proposed ordinance that if the individual selling the sexual activity is HIV positive and knows that fact, that this ordinance will not apply. And that is because under the state code, that is a felony. The city can't change that. So the city cannot decriminalize something the state has criminalized, nor can it take something that the state has deemed to be a felony and make it into a misdemeanor. So as long as the state statute provides that if you sell sexual activity for hire and knowing that you're HIV positive, or you purchase sexual activity knowing that you're HIV positive, as long as that's a felony under state law, which it is, the city can't change that. Again, we can't decriminalize that aspect of it, nor can we make that a misdemeanor offense. So if those are the facts at play in a certain situation, then our city ordinances would not apply, and we would have to proceed with prosecution under the state code for those factual scenarios. I am at this point, so I think I've laid out what the proposed ordinances cover, how they differ from what's currently in the ordinance, how they mirror the state code. I am now going to turn this over to Assistant City Prosecutor Mike Albritton. He works in arraignment court, working with offenders who plead guilty to this ordinance, excuse me, and works closely with our John School, which is something that we think is a useful tool. So I'll turn it over to Mike Albritton.
Mike, I think you're muted.
Councilmember Brown, thank you for having me.
Michael, before you begin, I want to be clear. Are there any questions from my council colleagues at all? And maybe before, again, Mike, before you begin, let me get some clarity from Deputy Chief Knight. How is the division ensuring that the officers working these cases are held to a higher standard, and how will misconduct be addressed?
Councilmember Brown, I'm glad that so the PAC program was developed, and I think you know this, in the wake of the disbandment of the Vice Unit, and has taken a very different approach to addressing this issue in a number of ways, from how enforcement occurs to how officers are selected and trained to how potential victims are treated. And this has been much more of a collaborative approach that requires human trafficking training for every officer working this assignment that's enforcing this code. And our operations include our partners, including Catch Court, Salvation Army, Out of Darkness, She Has a Name, Forensic Nurses of Ohio, and others that begin providing diversion and treatment options at the very first contact that the police have with these individuals, and then again in every step of the way. We have the opportunity for immediate medical assistance, addiction services, trauma counseling, and placement into Catch programs that's at our fingertips now. And this is our goal. Our goal is to break the cycle. Officers are specially trained, and the primary focus is to break that cycle of addiction and abuse. All arrest situations require a supervisor on duty and coordinating the response that is completely different than what we've done in the past. All arrest situations are made by uniformed officers only. All arrest situations require a minimum of 5 officers focused on the safety of the officer and the safety of the offender, and there are no more independent operations that are run. Those individuals that can be identified as potential human trafficking victims are debriefed by a member of the Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force in an effort to identify and build cases on the traffickers, and potentially to protect the victim at the onset if they're a victim of human trafficking. So our approach to this is completely different. It starts with selection of the officers, training of the officers, how we're running operations, and how we treat individuals that we believe are human trafficking victims from the very moment that we meet them.
Deputy Chief Knight, also, how often are individuals going to be rotating through the PAC unit?
So we we have a training officer that's in the unit, but we built the entire unit on rotating temporary positions of people we select. One of the things that we decided at the onset was that we didn't want individuals that were growing roots in this job and were there for years and years and years in what potentially could be an undercover assignment. We are rotating in younger officers that have human trafficking training. We're giving them additional training. They are heavily supervised, and then within, they're there for about 6 months, and then they're rotated back out to the street, which means that we're actually taking those trained officers that are now complying with the way we want to do business as a division, and we're putting them back out into the neighborhoods to take that training with them and become basically human trafficking experts. They will have all the contacts and the information on how to deal with these individuals when they come in contact with them on a daily basis. So we're actually building a program that is built on 6-month temp positions where individuals are rotated in and out on a regular basis, and the division has much more of an opportunity to select who we're training for this job.
And Attorney Tobias, how does this legislation help victims of human trafficking?
Well, by isolating the sellers of sexual activity and holding them just as accountable, if not more, as Deputy Chief Knight pointed out in her opening remarks, traditionally, when you look at the penalties and the sentences for the buyers versus the sellers, it's the sellers of the sexual activity, the individuals that are most likely the ones being exploited, that were traditionally treated more harshly than the sellers. So this eliminates that disparity. It allows for more attention to be paid to the buyers, and again, to eliminate the demand. The focus now is going to be much more with this ordinance, these proposed ordinances, the focus is much more on the demand side of the sexual activity and selling sexual activity, and trying to end the cycle of addiction and abuse and exploitation for human trafficking victims on the street.
Thank you, Attorney Tobias. At this stage, then, unless there are any questions, I see Councilmember Tyson. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brown. I certainly do appreciate the discussion that we've had already today. And I think it absolutely is appropriate that the penalties are certainly different from the buyer versus the seller. And just to hear that the training that the officers also will be getting to be able to, especially to work with the sellers in a way to help to get them the assistance that they may need. I have one quick question though for Deputy Chief Knight. So she mentioned that the police officers will have a 6-month stint. Will that mean that so if you serve 6 months, then you're obviously going to do other work with Columbus Police Department for the maybe other 6 months? Could you come back 6 months later after you've been away from it from 6 months to come back into to work again within this particular unit?
So this is a job that not everybody's going to be interested in, and we are creating very well-trained officers. So I have the opportunity to pull them back in for another 6-month rotation, but that is going to be up to the discretion of the division in most cases. I like to be able to select those individuals. We found that individuals that we have trained to do this, that are good at this and have recognized the value of the programs that we've put in place, they are the ones that we would like to come back. But I want to continue to have the opportunity to make that selection and not for having them grow roots. So yes, we can use those highly trained individuals again, but they have to reapply and go through the process, and we make a decision about those individuals based on what we need.
Thank you. And they will also become really great ambassadors in the community in regards to educating not only other officers about human trafficking, but other individuals. So I'm impressed by this project. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes,
Hi, it's Liz Brown here. I was wondering if I could jump in with a
of course.
question. Thank you. Deputy Director Knight, I was wondering if you could talk to, I know that the evidentiary burden is quite high for, I mean, you talked about the special training that it requires officers to do, but there's also a real evidentiary burden. And can you talk to us about what that looks like and how what securing these charges actually looks like from the law enforcement angle?
So without getting too much into tactics, we run operations where undercover females are put out on the streets, and they walk those streets in areas and neighborhoods where we have a lot of prostitution type offenses. And the Johns will approach them, and we ensure that we get the elements of the crime. That information is recorded so that we have evidence to support that in court. We also, at the same time, when these undercover police officers are out there on the street, we have 5 officers in support of that individual, watching the vehicles that approach, watching the officer for their safety, monitoring everything that's going on over audio tape so that they can hear the live feed on what's going on. We have been very successful in prosecuting these, having the information that we need to bring forward for these. So we haven't had a real problem with having enough evidence to do this. We are very much concerned with safety of everyone involved. So everything's recorded. A supervisor's monitoring that, and we're making sure that we get the elements of the crime. So you're not typically going to have somebody that's arrested that was just stopping and trying to find out what the time was from someone. We're going to have the elements of that crime when we make that arrest, or we're not going to make it. Any other questions?
Okay. Any other questions at all, Councilman Brown? Did that answer your question? Okay, excellent. We're going to move on. City Attorney Michael Albritton will provide background into the prosecution of these offenses and the use of educational diversion programs like John School. So, Michael, take us to school, Michael.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Brown. I've been running this program since 2009. Just to give you a little background, the John School is offered to first-time offenders. The individuals come into court, we offer them John School, and what that entails is a day-long program where they come in and we simply educate them as to the nature and consequences of their actions to teach them that this is not a victimless crime. We have a number of speakers that come in from the community to talk about their neighborhoods and how prostitution has affected their property and the neighborhoods that they live in. We get a lot of volunteers to come in and help us out. Salvation Army has been a big help with that as well. We have former Johns come in to talk about how the nature and consequences of their actions have affected their lives and what they went through in terms of being arrested, charged, having to tell their families, going to court, going in front of a judge, what that impact has had on their lives, which I think is very profound, at least to them. Columbus Public Health comes in and does a presentation, talk about the dangers of sexually transmitted infections, and essentially the dangers that could happen to the Johns if they engage in this kind of activity. As well as we have victims of human trafficking come in and talk about how their lives have been impacted, and that, again, this is not a situation where you have a transaction between 2 consenting adults, that that this has real consequences. They talk about their lives, how they're addicted to drugs, and how that they would do anything to feed their drug habit. So essentially, it's an 8-hour course that's kind of an icebreaker to educate them and inform them that this is a kind of conduct that has much collateral damage to the community and to themselves. So that's what I've been doing since 2009. I just want to stress that what this is, again, is just an icebreaker. A lot of these guys come in and they have obviously issues that just cannot be solved with an 8-hour course. This is something that we offer to them for first-time offenders, again, individuals that typically do not have a criminal record. And we've seen some positive results. The question I always ask myself is, what is a successful John School graduate? And for me, as long as they do not engage in solicitation again, I'm satisfied. I'd like to think that they've received the message that they will go out and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And many people have, many Johns have come in afterwards and have volunteered for my course. So they do get the message. Many of them do get the message. Others, not so much, but as long as they do not repeat offend, I consider that a success. Is it as a result of the John School? I can't tell you. I will tell you that many individuals that have to go through the act of being arrested by a police officer, charged in court, hire an attorney, attend the John School, this does have an impact on them for individuals that don't have a criminal record. So we do have a low repeat offender rate for individuals that have been through the John School. It's possible they have not been caught yet, but overall, I think it's worth the effort, and we've seen some positive results. I think this, again, is something that is just an icebreaker, and that they need more access to counseling, which we do provide them with information. We do have a relationship counselor come in to discuss. We have other individuals that come in, and we do provide access and information to counseling services as well. So that's what we generally do for an 8-hour course. And that's the John School. With regard to prosecuting these cases, individuals that come into arraignment court, which I operate, we have them do a number of things. Attend the John School. It would involve a plea to some kind of criminal conviction, typically loiter, soliciting, a misdemeanor of the 3rd degree. We also require them to receive a STI test to see if there's, get them connected with services. Franklin County and Columbus Public Health keep records of information. And so test results from the STIs get passed around so that Columbus Public Health and Franklin County Board of Health has information as to the rise in sexually transmitted infections.
A couple questions on my part, Michael, and then if any of my colleagues have any questions. Approximately how many individuals per year are directed to John School?
Well, that depends on the number of arrests. When the number of arrests go high, I schedule a program. So this most recent year, obviously, we have not had that many Johns. I had one program last February, just prior to the pandemic, that had a class of about 23 Johns. When there were numerous things going on, I would operate the class quarterly, and I would cut the class off at 50 Johns. So we would always have some extra Johns left over. There are other John schools that we have accepted that we work in conjunction with in my program. So again, it just depends on the number of arrests, sir.
And how can community members get involved in these programs if they choose to?
Many of them actually are involved. We're very grateful to the Franklinton Area Commission, as well as other organizations that have volunteered their services. They can reach out to me to possibly get involved. We always have a need for volunteers, but Salvation Army has been a great help in terms of providing assistance and operating the class.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions from my colleagues? Moving forward then, Officer Ken Lawson, Victim Services Liaison for the Columbus Division of Police, will share some information about potential pilot therapeutic diversion programs for buyers.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown, for holding this hearing and for the invitation. Columbus Division of Police did significant research into our community's address of this issue. Deputy Chief Knight tasked us with identifying things that would assist in reducing the demand in our community. And part of that took us into meeting with local and state stakeholders. And we were trying to do a thorough analysis and then started talking to national contacts about programs that went beyond the normal John School programming. And that led us to this program called TOPS. It's the only therapist-led program we were able to identify that exceeded John School. The program was developed by a sexual compulsive and addictive therapist. She co-founded the first John School in Dallas back in 2011, operated it for 5 years, realized from her background that they were not meeting all the needs of all of their participants. And so started researching and developing this program to meet those needs of the ones that needed more attention than an education program could afford or could offer. It is designed to be work up to a 12 or 13 session program. We have worked to try and identify a local therapist and have. That individual is prepared to offer an 8-session program that would be about an hour and a half in length each session. The qualifications to offer this, according to the TOPS program, is that you have to be a master's level clinician or above. You have to have specialized training in treating sexual compulsive and addictive behavior. And you also have to receive specialized training in the program itself. The success of it, it's been beta tested in the Dallas area. They ran 5 groups. It was assessed by an independent review board from Southern Mississippi. It is the basis of a doctoral level program. And we are looking to get it implemented here as a sentencing alternative. We've spoken with the judges here in Franklin County about the alternative as far as offering this. The program comes with assessment tools that would be able to differentiate the needs of those who would qualify for the education program of John School and those who would need to go to a more intensive program like the TOPS program, which stands for Treatment of Prostitution Solicitors. The General Assembly last session did pass in House Bill 431 that judges are required to sentence a convicted sex buyer to either education or treatment. We have received a lot of attention for the work that we are doing in this arena. I have not seen any communities in Ohio that have turned to treatment as an alternative in sentencing. So the attention has been geared toward what are you doing in this arena? We have answered questions from legislators from other cities here in Ohio. I have also had 2 meetings with people from out of state who are looking to implement this in their state and are asking about the research and why we turn to this program. And we believe that we are building a significant help to people in our community who are dealing with those compulsive and addictive behaviors that would help them to identify it, to come up with strategies to overcome it. Our hope ultimately is that these buyers become better husbands, better fathers, better employees who are less distracted by those compulsions and addictions and can focus on family life, parenthood, employment, and the other things that are impacted by this. And with that, I'll pause and take any questions that you have.
Officer Lawson, two questions again for you. What is the financial cost of the program, and can it be offered for those who wish to take it voluntarily?
In terms of the cost, we are
Wants to begin, Grant.
yeah, we are estimating that the cost could come in between about $800 or $1,000 per participant. It is possible that some of those who are convicted of this are able to pay their own way. We are trying to identify funding sources to assist those who are not able to. We have been encouraged by legislators from several cities in Ohio who would like to see this program proven so that they can then recommend it to their communities. They're encouraging us to pursue pilot funding through the state. We've had those discussions. We are waiting on continuation of that, but we are hoping for pilot project funding. In addition to that, we are looking at several other sources of funding that would help us to be able to implement this program. And it has also gained the attention of researchers at one of the universities here in the state that want to step in and evaluate us for over a 12-month period to assess the effectiveness of what we are doing. So it has gained a lot of attention. There is a cost associated with it, but we're hoping to be able to offset that and offer it. And I'm sorry, could you help me with your second question again?
Volunteer to participate in the program.
We are hoping to be able to address this through both arrest and non-arrest. Deputy Chief Knight's direction is to reduce demand in the community. And that requires that we look at alternatives to arrest in order to do that. And part of it is that we want to identify resources within the community. We want to educate spouses, partners who may be engaged in relationships with sex buyers that the police are not able to identify through our operations, but to be able to direct them toward resources that would help them get those individuals' needs addressed and get them to change course on this behavior. So the answer is yes. We're hoping to be able to offer this to those who are arrested and also to individuals who are not arrested.
Again, thank you, Officer Lawson. Is there any questions from my colleagues? We're going to move on then to Assistant City Attorney Heidi Carr, who will give some background into the Catch Court and the efforts to provide support to victims of human trafficking. Attorney Carr?
Brown.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So Catch Court is a specialty docket. It stands for Changing Actions to Changing Habits, and it was started by the Honorable Judge Paul Herbert in 2009. Judge Herbert was actually in arraignment court and was doing the domestic violence cases. He was presiding over those cases when he saw that there was a woman that was charged with domestic violence and had bruises all over her face, but the alleged victim on the case actually ended up being her trafficker. And when he kind of studied the cases more, found that domestic violence is very related to human trafficking cases, and that's how he started the Catch Court program. Catch Court is usually a 2-year probation program. When the women are arrested or given a summons by police, when they come through court, they are given the option to voluntarily sign into Catch Court. We usually sign them up for 2 years. Sometimes it may take longer. And through Catch Court, we work with housing agencies while they're in treatment. Now, it is not a requirement, but we found that if the clinicians say they don't have to live in one of those housings and they end up living separately, a lot of them end up relapsing. So we work with places like Amethyst or Chat House or Mary Haven, where the women would stay during treatment. We also work with some agencies that help place those women in housing after treatment and after graduation of catch court. While in catch court, they have 4 phases that they have to kind of complete, and each phase has a requirement. So, for example, the first phase to phase up, they have to complete at least 3 months of treatment. They have to demonstrate consistent attendance to status review hearings, groups, appointments, and meetings. They would review Catch 101 content with staff. Which Catch 101 is a 3-day program that we offer to first-time soliciting offenders. It's kind of like a low-level catch court. Again, it's just 3 days, and we give them an overview on human trafficking. A lot of the human trafficking victims that come into court do not realize they are being trafficked. Sometimes they just think it's, a bad relationship that they're in. But when we let them know, there's forced fraud or coercion going on over here. This person is forcing you to go out there and is forcing you to give them, the money that you make. They then realize they are being trafficked. They must complete and turn in a copy of their relapse prevention plan and present relapse plan in court and schedule a meeting with the catch team. This is just the first phase up. There's 3 other ones, including one in order to graduate from catch court. They also must complete or attend, they must attend 2 group sessions a week, group counseling sessions a week. They're always supervised. They have to drop randomly twice a week, so they have to give a urine sample to make sure they're not dropping dirty. They have to at least attend 4 support meetings a week as well, and they have to attend one-on-one trauma counseling weekly, as well as attend catch court, which is also a weekly program. So again, it is usually 2 years. Sometimes we have some relapses. Sometimes we have, other violations. So that may take a little longer. Once they graduate, they do have the option to get all their cases related to human trafficking expunged. It is a hearing that we hold, and they just prove that they were trafficked. They have to prove force fraud or coercion. Once they prove that burden, then we're able to expunge their cases. Some stats that I have on catch court participants: 72% of them grew up in poverty. 86% of them don't have a high school diploma or GED. 93% of them are mothers. 83% of them have had some sort of experience with the mental health system. 100% of them have a substance abuse disorder. 94% experience sexual violence, and 94% have had intimate partner violence. There is a 45% recidivism rate in catch court, which compared to the national statistic, it's 80, which is 80% nationally. And that recidivism rate drops 20% for graduates of catch court. Let's see. Catch court is a high-risk, high-need program, and it is, again, a voluntary program. It is free for participants, so they don't have to pay anything to attend. Participation in catch court is not the only way to access those services. We try to have catch staff speak to any of the women or any victim of human trafficking that is charged with soliciting, to give them other ways they can access services. Like if they need detox programs, but I will say a lot of a lot of the benefits they get from catch court are things like, we help them get a driver's license back. We help them, with child custody, because a lot of them would lose custody of their children and things like that. But if they decide they don't want to attend catch court and still need help, catch court staff do connect them with the services that they need. There is always a need for funding to increase access to catch court. I know housing is a huge issue, especially housing after treatment. We're working with Sober Living right now to help give those women apartments or housing after. I know some of the agencies we work with while in treatment can potentially give them Section 8 vouchers to use to live after treatment as well. And I believe this is all I have, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Carr. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any questions, if they even remain, but I'm just looking forward to hearing from the next speaker. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I would now like to invite our speakers to offer testimony at this afternoon's hearing. Our first speaker is former Franklin County Court Judge and old friend of mine, Judge Paul Herbert. Is he on, Angie?
He is, sir. Just a moment. I'm going to unmute him.
Thank you.
Judge Herbert?
Hi.
There we go.
Judge Herbert, the floor is yours, sir. How you doing?
How are you?
I'm blessed, my friend.
It's good to see you again. I'm down in Florida, retired now.
I'm jealous.
Do I have video? Can you guys see me?
We cannot see you, sir. Have you tried to activate the camera?
How's that?
We do
Okay.
Oh, there you are.
have it now. Thank you.
There you go. Good to see you
Yes.
guys.
Paul, the floor is yours, my friend, about catch court.
Well, it's good to see all of you again. It really makes my heart fill with joy to be a part of this. So thanks for inviting me. And it's great to see all the hard work over the last 10 years come to fruition here today. And I want to let you guys know, you should feel a real sense of pride because Columbus, Ohio is the leading place in the country on how to rescue and restore and get to the issue that's at hand. From the mayor's office to city council to the police to the treatment to the Salvation Army, and everybody has been just amazing in making Columbus really be the leader. So I wanted to let you know that I've reviewed the legislation and I think it's excellent. The one thing from a former judge's perspective that I wanted to mention, and Heidi did a great job talking about catch court. Obviously, it's the apple of my eye from my whole career. But from the perspective of this legislation, whenever you have mandatory fines, you're going to possibly get some pushback from judges. And there's good reason for that in many cases, because judges like to look at each case individually and make decisions based on the facts and circumstances surrounding the case, what would or should be fair and equitable to members of the community when they're sentencing them. So on that hand, I recognize wholeheartedly perhaps some of the pushback you might experience from the bench. However, I'm very biased in this particular instance, and I would want to say that when you have the level of indifference and I hate to use that word, but it seems like that word is apropos, from judges to take this issue as serious as perhaps some of us feel that they might, because they've had opportunities to be educated by myself, my staff, and that's been year after year. So, and if it's still being treated as not as serious as we believe it is, then I think you're in the very right to go forward with these mandatory sentences. And they're not, these mandatory sentences are not what I would consider onerous. I mean, you're not even mandatory probation with treatment. So I don't think you should really have too much to worry. And I know Melanie and Mike and all the other prosecutors down there are going to need to remind the judges of the mandatory sentencing requirements. And also, there used to be a mandatory license suspension if an automobile was used during the commission of the soliciting offense. I'm not sure if that's still in with the new law or not, but that was always something that was there. So it's been my great pleasure to serve and to be a part of the generation that made this known. And I can't tell you how proud of you all are now that you're the generation that's doing something about this in a significant way. So if I can be of any encouragement to you during this time, I just want to let you all know how much I appreciate you and what a wonderful, wonderful job you're doing. So thank you very much.
Judge Herbert, thank you for your many years of experience, my friend. Enjoy your time of retirement, and we'll still call upon you without question, Paul, for some additional clarity and engagement.
Thanks, Mitch. And I want to tell you that I remember you being one of the early on people who endorsed what I was doing and met with me, and we sat around a table with a bunch of other folks, and you've always been so supportive. So I really appreciate it.
We'll continue to deal with the issue, my friend. I see my colleague Elizabeth Brown. Did you have any questions for Judge Herbert?
Well, I'm not sure if it's for Judge Herbert or for Heidi or exactly, but it's on the topic of
Sure.
of the women involved, and so I just want to throw it out, and really whoever's best to answer can. She really has a way of piping up as soon as I get on my microphone. So there have been some studies, I think Canada and Sweden, that have shown there is some decrease in negotiating power that the sex workers actually on the street or the victims of human trafficking have, because I'm so sorry for my angle here. You know what? I'm just going to turn this off and you're going to hear my voice. Because of, they have a decrease in negotiating power because of fear of sex buyers of being caught, and that can have an adverse effect on the woman in that transaction or the seller of sex, whether they're a victim of human trafficking or a sex worker, that sort of power dynamic changes when I don't know if power dynamic's the right way to put it. I hope I'm explaining this well, but you know, the kinds of things like location or condom use or various things that the seller may try to ensure occurs if the buyer is very wary of being targeted for enforcement, then that affects that negotiating conversation. And this has played out in other countries where some of these end demand laws have passed. And so I wonder if this has been a consideration for advocates of victims of human trafficking in this scenario, or if we've considered that on the city's part, whether more resources need to be extended to the workers on the street. And I don't know who best is to take that question, and I'm sorry that it was a bit of a ramble there, but I'm just curious whether that's been considered or the research in other locations around this has really been combed through so that we understand all of the layers here.
Deputy Chief Knight, would you like to take a stab at that, please?
Okay, so tell me if I'm wrong. I think the question was, have we considered how this type of legislation to reduce demand will buyers more wary of being caught and therefore change the dynamic when they're negotiating on the street or negotiating and other things that potentially put those women at greater risk? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes, correct. So that in that negotiating conversation, the woman doesn't feel like she can really press on the John to the longer that conversation is, the more the John is skeptical that maybe she is undercover. And then, so that has an effect, again, in this research, I think what I saw was from Canada and Sweden, that has an effect on basically those conversations where there is not an undercover officer present. It is, but it sort of shortens what the buyers of sex are willing to put up with, I guess, as a conversation in the beginning. And therefore, women aren't able to ask for as many protections for themselves.
So I think I can kind of answer that from a perspective of actually working these operations. As an officer, I was a decoy out there for many years, and I was put out there. So I've been involved in that negotiation. I think I know what you're talking about. We really hope that what this legislation does is put real penalties in place so that buyers are wary of buying sex in Columbus, where they do not want to buy sex here. Our goal is to make them so wary that they are not going to drive down Sullivan Avenue and approach any woman for any reason. And if the conversation at the car at where they're negotiating terms is extended because they're wary and then they decide that it's not worth the risk, I'm hoping that's the environment that we can create. I pray that's the environment to create. Studies have shown that increased penalties is one of the things that buyers consider first and foremost, that and being exposed to the public, their family, their employer for the activities that they're doing. So I really hope that that's making people pause. And if that buyer is too afraid to drive down Sullivan Avenue, then they are not abusing and taking advantage of the women that are in that area. So I hope that's the outcome. And I'm hoping that answered the question, Councilmember Brown.
No, I do appreciate that. And I'd love to follow up with the studies that I was looking at, because I think that as the goal, you know, what you said about your hope of the ultimate effect, but the reality of what takes place in the interim is a conversation where a woman, and many of these women who end up in catch court are on the street selling sex, and they are having to compromise some of the standards they've tried to put in place for their own safety, right? And while what you just talked about is the ultimate hope, there is this time in between, or there is just the reality that exists outside of our hope for the ultimate goal that does put negative pressure on the real situation of that often desperate situation of that woman on the street. So I'd love to make sure we send to you that research that we looked at, because I don't think that we go, the world is not in black and white, obviously, as you are well aware. And so we don't go from point A to point Z without all of the letters in between and understanding the reality for women on the street in that time.
If I could, can I say one thing here, folks?
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you're both got the right perspective, and feel free to call upon the group of survivor leaders that we have, the community of survivor leaders that we have established through Catch Court that could sit down and go through with you exactly each paradigm that you're talking about, and I think give you really good feedback as to what that woman out there is going through.
That'd be great.
President Pro Tem, if you will get the research to my office, I'll make certain that it gets distributed to the right folks, and we can do some additional conversation regarding that issue.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The next speaker is Courtney Shoemaker, Executive Director of She Has a Name. Ms. Shoemaker?
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
All right, so I'm Courtney Schmuckers. I'm Executive Director over at She Has a Name. We are a community of abolitionists that exists to fight human trafficking through education, through advocacy, and by caring for those impacted. So I am offering this testimony in support of the proposed increased penalties to buyers of sex within the city of Columbus, and to provide a little more context for the effectiveness of the proposed amendments. So I was asked to speak a little bit more about what effect this might have on human trafficking in Columbus. Based on national research, we've seen that increased penalties may lead to fewer buyers as an effective deterrent. About a quarter of buyers strongly agree that the risk of arrest is so high that I might stop, according to Demand Abolition's groundbreaking research report that studied the sex buying habits of 8,000 US men. That report also advocated for increased penalties like mandatory minimum fines, arresting and adjudicating buyers, and developing effective long-term buyer education programs, which is known as John Schools.
Ms. Schmucker, excuse me
Yes.
for interrupting. I didn't know if you
go
wanted
ahead.
your video showing at this time.
I have not been able to get that working.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm. Thank you. My apologies for the interruption.
Oh, not at all. I've tried my best. So second, based on local research, we have seen that there is a change in behaviors for many of the 850 plus men who have graduated since 2005 from Columbus Public John School, as you heard about, led by Assistant City Attorney Mike Alberton. And as you know, John Schools are one of the proposed penalties for first-time solicitation offenders. The recidivism rate for those who have completed Columbus's Public John School remains around 5%. In addition, of the 400 plus men who filled out surveys, about 80% said they would change their mind about paying for sex if they had known the majority of prostitutes are homeless, are victims of violence, and start at a very young age. This local data mirrors the national research that Demand Abolition's report that suggested about 1/3 of active buyers strongly agree that they do not want to do it again. That's a sentiment that's shared by most former buyers as well. So I wanted to highlight also She Has a Name's John School. We work in tandem with the Public John School as a private alternative. We've participated in both public and private John Schools for about 6 years. We adopted former Franklin County Municipal Court Judge Scott Vanderkar's private John School program about a year ago, in an effort to fulfill our vision to see all those impacted by human trafficking thriving in community. We've successfully administered one iteration of the course, and we plan to do so again next month in April. To provide additional support for the John School, here's what we have included, and you'll see it closely mirrors the public John School. There are 6 presentations that cover the topics, including the public health implications of solicitation, recognizing and healing from childhood trauma, healthy relationships, accepting responsibility for solicitation, a survivor of human trafficking's experience in prostitution, as well as Human Trafficking 101. So solicitors are connected with restorative resources like counseling, which enables deeper issues of childhood trauma or addiction to be handled rather than ignored, as Ken Lawson was sharing as well. In conclusion, She Has a Name supports the proposed amendments to solicitation changes within the City of Columbus. We look forward to the positive impact such an amendment will have in the fight against human trafficking, and we hope to one day see these penalties across the state of Ohio. I want to leave you with a story that proves that change is possible with these increased penalties. A young man named Ryan attended the public John School, and he had struggled with depression and loneliness for years, so he decided to solicit, and at that point got arrested by an undercover officer. Since his arrest, Ryan has graduated from the John School, he's become an official volunteer with She Has a Name, and he's even become a teacher at the John School. So here's what he wants us to. I knew going into the program that I wanted to get involved in the fight against human trafficking, but after participating in the program, I knew I had to. The program opened my eyes to the world of human trafficking, and in my heart, I knew I wanted to help in any way possible. Through the experience, I found a relationship with God and gained a better understanding of the awful world of human trafficking that prior to this experience, I knew nothing about. I wish more than anything I could take back my mistake, but in a strange way, it's made me a better person. I now know that I can move forward and raise awareness with dreams of ending this horrible issue. And Ryan's story isn't alone. We have 2 other John School graduates who have since become anti-trafficking advocates. And at the end of the day, that's what this fight is all about. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Shoemaker. And I would like to acknowledge that Council President Harden has joined us. Thank you, sir. And the next speaker is Michelle Hannon, Anti-Human Trafficking Director of the Salvation Army and Manager of the Central Ohio Reach and Restore Coalition. Ms. Hannon?
Getting unmuted there. Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Councilmember Brown, thank you so much for your leadership and for this opportunity to speak today. This is, I think, a really exciting opportunity, and I'm just really pleased to be able to just weigh in a little bit on the need for this amendment. So I serve as the Anti-Human Trafficking Director for the Salvation Army. I've been there for a long time, but for the past 13 years in my work with the Salvation Army, my focus has been on combating human trafficking. And so we play several different roles in the community. So just quickly, a bit about the Central Ohio Reach and Restore Coalition. We joined with many other community leaders in 2007 to launch the coalition. And at that time, the coalition group that was convening requested that we serve as the coalition manager. So we accepted, and we continue in that role today. And today, our coalition is comprised of over 100 organizations and hundreds of individuals actually working together to combat human trafficking. And then, as wearing again our other hat, we are both supporting this community-wide effort to combat human trafficking for trafficking survivors. So we operate Central Ohio's 24-hour hotline and on-scene emergency response services. So we respond 24/7 to assist survivors in center locations, conducting trauma therapy groups with incarcerated survivors, and also providing co-located victim services with the Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, and then also supporting the work of the Columbus Police Department's PACT initiative. So regardless of how a survivor is identified, we are able to offer comprehensive long-term case management. And our program's purpose is to assist survivors in exiting trafficking and to support their individual paths toward healing, recovery, and stability. So over the past 13 years, we've engaged with several thousand survivors in various capacities, and over 1,200 of those have been folks who've engaged with us in long-term case management. And as we've helped them to build stability in their lives, we've seen survivors make amazing use of their own gifts and determination and the community resources that we are all really seeking to build, and really seeing them regain stability and thriving outside their trafficking situation. But unfortunately, we have also seen firsthand the damage that is wrought by the sex industry in the lives of survivors. I know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time really providing an overview there. I think we're most fairly aware of what that damage looks like. We are committed to ensuring that survivors have access to immediate and long-term supports to help them exit the life and rebuild their stability. But we realize that the only way to really end sex trafficking is to eliminate the demand for purchased sex, which is why we are so really excited about this effort and this initiative. We have long noted the inequity in a system that is focused on arresting the sellers while allowing traffickers and sex buyers to avoid prosecution. We've been so pleased over the past several years with the City of Columbus's increased focus on holding buyers of sex accountable. And we really feel that this proposed amendment is a tremendous advancement forward in reducing the demand for sex. By creating the unique misdemeanor of sexual exploitation, you are really establishing a foundation for holding buyers accountable. And particularly the increased financial penalties, it really sends a message that sexual exploitation of our most vulnerable citizens will not be tolerated here. And while research on the effectiveness of demand reduction strategies is somewhat limited, there are studies out there, and the published surveys of sex buyer perspectives indicate that substantial penalties and public accountability will deter future sex buying behavior. And historically, because these penalties were insignificant, buyers of sex who were arrested could avoid accountability with their families, in their workplaces, and in their communities. But this proposed amendment will make it far more difficult for arrested buyers to avoid accountability. We are also encouraged by the recommendation that buyers participate in the Training of Prostitution Solicitors Treatment Program to change buyer attitudes and behaviors and to prevent recidivism. And while penalties are an important deterrent, the treatment program really is a positive step to identify and address the root causes of sex buying. And we look forward to building capacity as a community to support the rehabilitation of sex buyers and to prevent ongoing engagement in sexual exploitation. And I just want to conclude by saying thank you again for taking leadership in this issue and for setting an example for the state of Ohio. And also just to please note to reach out to us if we can be of assistance in any way.
Ms. Hannon, thank you for the engagement of the Salvation Army, and we appreciate you being with us this afternoon. Also, we have Ms. Tiffany Tripp, coordinator of Out of Darkness, Ohio. Ms. Tripp, thank you for being with us. This floor is yours.
Brown, Hardin, Tyson, very much appreciate the opportunity to provide this testimony to the Solicitation Code Amendment. I'm the program coordinator for Out of Darkness, Columbus, and I've worked directly with victims of commercial sexual exploitation for the past 5 years through street outreach, our drop-in center, and our emergency safe home. We've been invited as a social service agency to meet with the women during law enforcement operations and offer our safe home services to them when they are released. Many of these women we have built relationships with through our outreach programs, and through developed relationships, then we can testify firsthand to the implications this amendment would have in reducing the demand for sexual exploitation and human trafficking in the city of Columbus. Like any business, trafficking relies on the law of supply and demand. And while we and multiple other organizations like Salvation Army and She Has a Name, we work tirelessly to reach and rescue and restore survivors, it's only half of it. And we'll never end human trafficking until we reduce the demand that's driving it in the first place. That's why we believe this amendment is so important, and we applaud the efforts being made to increase the penalty and provide education and opportunities for counseling for those who would exploit and abuse the most vulnerable of us. Around the world and in cities across America, demand reduction policies are being put in place, and there's a lot of research out there that they are working. The one I last saw was 50 to 75% reduction in street prostitution in Sweden. A couple years ago, Sergeant Mark Rapp, the former director of the Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, spoke directly to that issue in an interview with the Dispatch when he stated that at the heart of the human trafficking problem here in Central Ohio are the buyers, who just seem to keep escaping through the system. They're able to commit their crime, get back in their car, and leave. So often, we see the purchaser walk away and the victim face the penalty, seen only as a prostitute, a community problem, an addict. In our daily work on the front lines, we can speak to who these women are and what they experience on a daily basis. Many of them are battling addiction, which traffickers exploit for their purposes, and most experienced childhood trauma. Their addiction may have been a way to deal with their trauma, was introduced by family members or by their traffickers as a way to control them, identified as a vulnerability that could be leveraged. Violence is a part of their everyday life. every week we see women, bruises, evidence of strangulation. Just recently, a woman broke her hip jumping from a car to escape a John. Research on the violence experienced by women in prostitution is difficult to come by, as many women are unwilling to report it due to distrust or fear of arrest. But studies have reported anywhere from 82 to 95% of women in prostitution have experienced some type of sexual assault. 68 to 75% have been raped by a client. So despite what some may think, prostitution is not a choice made by those that have choices. It is, however, a prevailing mindset among men who purchase sex. So we know from a recent research report conducted in November of 2018 by Demand Abolition that the main driver of sex buying, its beliefs about the commercial sex trade, combines associated ideas. Prostituted women enjoy the act. It is mostly a victimless crime. Are merely taking care of their needs, and they're just guys being guys. We also learned from that report that approximately 13 to 16% of men have purchased sex, and of those, about 25% purchase weekly or monthly. So they account for nearly 75% of market transactions. But unfortunately, only about 6% who purchase sex illegally report ever having been arrested for it. So when buyers do perceive that risk, it can lead them to alter their activities, particularly those high-frequency buyers. We do not want to simply vilify these individuals. We recognize that many of these men would benefit from help as well, and so support the work to educate them about human trafficking and sexual exploitation and connect them with counsel. Many men who have bought sex in the past wish to stop. As Courtney said, about a third of active buyers strongly agreed that they would not want to do it again. It's time now to address the demand in Columbus for commercial sexual exploitation, to hold buyers accountable, to offer opportunities for education and healing, and to protect those among us who are the most vulnerable. Our personal belief is that every single one of us want to see trafficking come to an end in the city of Columbus. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Tripp. I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. I would now like to invite the community members to offer testimony. They've been waiting patiently regarding the impact of solicitation and human trafficking in their neighborhoods. And our first speaker is Lisa Boggs.
Hi, Chair Brown.
Hello, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good.
It's good to see you. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here, and I want to wish everybody a good afternoon. Council President Hardin, Council Pro Tem Brown, Councilmember Tyson, all the organizations and neighbors that are here today. I thank you guys for all coming together to support this important legislation that is important to our neighborhoods too. I'm speaking as a neighborhood leader and from the perspective of the neighborhoods where this takes place. My name is Lisa Boggs. I'm a lifelong Columbus, Ohio area resident, and I've lived and owned my house in the Hilltop area 3 blocks from Sullivan Avenue. I've owned it for 30 years, and I've been involved in the community for almost the whole time and advocated for safe, clean, and decent neighborhoods for a long time. I know this neighborhood well, and I spend a considerable amount of time and effort making it or trying to make it a better place for us all to live and raise our families. I support this proposed legislation and believe in socking it to the Johns. Sock them in the wallet. They supply money to vulnerable women who take it back to the dope man. And this fuels the violence and crime in our neighborhoods. Sex workers, drug dealers, criminals, loiterers, and others who hang on our streets drive out decent businesses and residents who just want to live and work in a decent neighborhood, just like everyone else. They decimate the local economy and they chase out fellow neighbors and cause them to stay in their houses and not really go outside and work in their yards or walk in the neighborhood like normal people do. This is not normal. This is not normal behavior. They are also not positive role models for our children. The very ones who we should place first in priority, as they are our hope and our future. Exactly almost a year ago, I happened to be cleaning trash on Sullivan Avenue when Burroughs Elementary School was being dismissed because of the pandemic. There was almost a traffic jam right near the school. Johns had no regard or respect for the children and, the parents picking up their children from schools. And they were doing this right in front of our kids. I thought about the little ones gazing out the school window every day, daydreaming, yet they have to see these women strung out in the streets and hopping into vehicles. They see this every day. What message is this sending to our little girls? And will little boys think this is an appropriate way to treat women in this manner when they grow up? It's disgraceful that because area children live in a disadvantaged area, they are continually exposed to this behavior like it's normal, and no one seems to care. Not only the Johns pick up women for sex and perform it in the alleys behind our homes, but they also buy dope and support the drug dealers too. And this fuels violence and crime in our neighborhoods. It makes everything like a vicious cycle and a web, and is anything but innocent and victimless. We are the victims too over here in our neighborhoods. My fellow community members are simply attempting to live their life in peace and with a sense of dignity in our own homes. Families are trying to raise their children the best way they can and the best way that they're able. And this behavior by Johns and the women is anything but peaceful, and the community deserves better. It is obvious that arresting the women is like walking through a revolving door and is not the only answer. So it's time for a different approach. Hit those Johns in the wallet. And if that does not work, perhaps it's high time that they are given a space and a time to reflect on the damage they have caused to our community and to the women on these streets. Let's move on this legislation as the weather is warming and things are getting worse already. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And also speaking this evening with regards to the community is Ms. Donna Bates. She's been on with us from the very beginning. Ms. Bates, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown, and to Council President Hardin. My name is Donna Bates. I live on the south side of Columbus, near Route 104. And I want to say that what Lisa said, we agree with on the south side. But as I have expressed and we have discussed in our meetings, our civic meetings, this is an issue where we do support this change. We think will be a positive one in reducing the amount of negative activity that occurs. But we also feel that we cannot legislate, fine, or incarcerate our way out of this situation. And while it's not addressed directly in this particular legislation, we hope that City Council and others who are resources to help the women in this situation will consider additional funding. It's really critical, I think, that not only Catch Court, but she has a name, and those other organizations, Salvation Army, have some ability to help additional people. I believe that the problem is much larger than what we think, and I may be wrong. Again, I agree with Lisa that historically it happens in those socially economic areas that they feel comfortable approaching. And when seniors and other residents feel captured in their own homes and don't feel comfortable calling the police or calling 311, then it exacerbates the situation and it continues to grow. So I hope with this legislation, those particular men will be discouraged from coming into those areas. I'm hopeful that PAC perhaps will get additional funding, that they increase numbers a little bit. We are probably the only city, I think, that has taken a more aggressive approach, and I hope it will continue. But I also hope that we will continue to look at those issues that really affect and have great impact. Homelessness, education, unemployment, those things are critical to why these women feel a need. And once they are attracted to that and are addicted with substance abuse, it's a vicious cycle that is hard to stop. But my main comment is that, yes, I do think that this legislation will help, but I also want to also have you consider or think about, we have seen on the South Side youth, young adults that are in this same situation. And I did not see in the legislation, and I'm sure that it is, that there will be a differentiation of how young women under the age of 18 are addressed and how they are helped. But thank you for this opportunity. We're hopeful that going forward that this will be the beginning of a decrease in this kind of activity. We know we'll probably never stop it totally, but we want to bring it down 99% at least. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Bates. Deputy Chief Knight, would you at least address the concern that Ms. Bates brought up regarding individuals under the age of 18?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Bates. I appreciate your comments and your concern about the juveniles that we come in contact with. So our PACT team does come in contact with juveniles in this capacity. And when that happens, we have a different way of dealing with that, because we automatically believe that those juveniles are most often being trafficked. That's been our experience. So we immediately engage
available.
And so we engage the Human Trafficking Task Force. We immediately start calling our resources. Our goal is not to take these individuals into custody if we can avoid doing that. If there's another place that we can take them where they are safe. If this is an individual that's at risk, we engage the Human Trafficking Task Force to see if we can find them a place to stay that's safe. We also ensure that we work with our partners to do that as well. If addiction is the problem, then we are attempting to get them into some type of addiction services. So our first goal is to identify if they're a victim of human trafficking, which most times that's what we're seeing. And then it's to make them safe. Taking them into custody and detaining them is not our goal at all. And it is a last course of business for us if there's no other way to make them safe. So yeah, we are extremely concerned about the juveniles that we're coming into contact with. I will tell you that a lot of times we are seeing juveniles trafficked by a family member. And it's extremely offensive to even think that a family member would do that, but we are seeing that in a variety of circumstances. So we're looking at building cases against their trafficker and ensuring the safety of that juvenile. So thank you very much for that question. And, you know, I really hope moving forward that we will have good luck with identifying and removing them from that type of environment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. The last speaker with regards to the community is Ms. Davenport. I don't see her. Angela, do we have a Ms. Davenport?
I can check the attendees list, sir. I do not see a Miss Davenport.
That's fine.
My apologies.
No, not at all, Angie. Thank you. Then we've now come to the public testimony of today's public hearing. I will call the names of the speakers in order in which they have contacted my office. Our staff will unmute your microphone. Please share your name and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes. We're going to start with Ms. Emily Dunlap.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I also, similar to Courtney, cannot find my video, so you'll just be hearing from me today.
That's okay.
My name is, thank you. My name is Emily Dunlap. I am a senior staff attorney with Advocating Opportunity. We are an anti-trafficking organization that provides free legal services and holistic social services to survivors of human trafficking. We have a Toledo office, and I am in our Columbus, Ohio office. We have the shared goals of everyone who has spoken today. In fact, I work with many of you on a regular basis, so it is great to see your faces and listen to your work today. Initially, I have some context and clarification for some of the things that we have heard today. First, I really want to make the point that sex work and human trafficking are not the same thing. Sex trafficking is when someone is compelled into commercial sexual activity, while sex work is when someone chooses to engage in commercial sex or any kind of erotic labor. It's kind of the folly of the anti-trafficking movement to contribute to conflating these two things and talking about them as if they are the same. This ignores relevant and important lived experiences of people engaged in sex work. And this continued conflation was really harmful to what must be a careful and nuanced conversation around these issues. I think to boldly assert that 92% of people engaged in selling sex are victims of human trafficking is a bit misleading. This takes a number that was polled by the Judge Herbert, who we heard from earlier today, who runs Catch Court, and extrapolates that number to everyone engaged in sex work in the city. So I think we have to be careful about when we use that number. Something that I have to talk about all the time is that Ohio is not fifth in the nation as far as instances of human trafficking crimes. I joke sometimes about this is the stat that won't go away. This is based on calls to the human trafficking hotline. This hotline actually had to publish clarification to stop this kind of information being used to support these claims. Just because someone is calling the national hotline does not actually mean that there is a human trafficking case or crime occurring, and we can't keep repeating these erroneous statistics in support of policy that has actually been studied and found to be ineffective. I heard a lot earlier in our discussion about the disparity in sentencing, and I get that this is a common point of frustration. Why do people who are convicted of selling sex punished at such greater rates than people who are buying? We heard from Mike earlier today, and Courtney as well, that John's School is pretty effective and there's very little recidivism. So buyers come in for a first-time, one-time offense, and we don't tend to see them again, whereas we continue to arrest sellers over and over. So a seller would also receive a lighter sentence for their first offense, but when we start to see jail time as we arrest them dozens of times. So this disparity could just as easily be fixed by reducing the penalties for sellers, but instead, for some reason, we're really focused on ratcheting up criminal penalties for buyers. And we really have to be honest about this context when we're contemplating something as serious as mandatory jail time, which appears to be an overreaching solution for a buyer recidivism problem that we're not seeing. We also have concerns about this end demand style legislation. We know that it puts people in more dangerous situations and only increases the marginalization of individuals engaged in sex work. This hyper-criminalization, like mandatory jail time, does not eliminate people who want to buy sex. All it does is push this deeper underground. We have people who are forced into more dangerous and more violent situations with limited time to negotiate for safety, like as Pro Tem Brown brought up earlier, condoms for increased risk of HIV and STI infection. And I don't know if we really believe that traffickers are going to stop trafficking people because we're taking these end demand efforts. We saw this in similar end demand efforts when we went after Backpage. And instead of eliminating human trafficking, it has made it more difficult for law enforcement to track and prosecute human trafficking. And again, this has not been shown to reduce instances of human trafficking or sex work. If you want to stop traffickers, focus your efforts on traffickers. You're going to have a much harder time getting information from those who are being victimized if your only interaction with them is arresting them time and time again. And I know that was a loud buzz. I know that CPD wants to be able to respond when someone encounters someone violent, but this doesn't achieve that goal. We are currently working on a literature review. While, as you've heard today, peer review studies supporting end demand policies are pretty sparse, but there is extensive research that has found that criminalized efforts such as these targeting buyers only causes harm and is fully ineffective at meeting its stated goals. It does not lower rates of human trafficking. It does not reduce sex work by ending demand, and it does not make the lives of those that the legislation is purporting to help any better. We are building that literature review. We've got about 6 studies now, and we plan to add at least 6 more from all 5 countries that have attempted this kind of criminalization. We are thrilled that City Council wants to invest what could amount easily to hundreds of thousands of dollars in incarceration costs into anti-trafficking work. So please listen to those who are asking for help, like Esther Flores asking for more drop-in centers, survivors like Holly Daniels and Barb Freeman who are running homes for survivors, street outreach and harm reduction collectives who are doing life-saving work every day. There are viable, economical, effective solutions that will actually help victims without unintentionally causing harm. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Dunlap. I appreciate your testimony. We also have on for this evening, Wyatt Burke. Angie, do you have a Wyatt Burke?
I'm here.
Mr. Burke, do please identify yourself and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes, sir.
My name is Wyatt Burke. I do not represent an organization, but I would first like to thank Emily as well as Elizabeth. Very well said and well done. Today, I am providing testimony on behalf of a friend who does not feel free to publicly attach her face to this issue. She has been a full local sex worker for over 9 years and wants to make it clear that it is a choice that she makes, and once it recognizes that this is also a choice for other people, and the difference between sex work.
Screen again, Grant.
That was brought up earlier. If you were to look up the platform of any sex worker-led organization, as well as organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, they all advocate for the decriminalization of sex work, not only for the benefit of consensual sex workers, but for trafficking victims as well. Decriminalization makes resources more accessible and less stigmatized for all parties involved, and makes it easier for those who want help to seek it without fear of repercussions. Focusing on decreasing demand by punishing those who purchase sexual services is referred to as the Nordic model, or end demand approach, as was stated earlier. That's because it doesn't work. That's because for people who sell services, it is often their best option, and a drop in demand does not deter them from selling. It only forces them to lower their prices or offer more risky services. They might feel the need to seek a third party to require more business, and this can increase their chances of exploitation. It makes safety practices like verifying the identity of a client more difficult because clients are less willing to comply. It forces sex workers to prioritize protecting their clients from the police by working alone, meeting in isolated areas, getting into cars quicker, spending less time negotiating, and making faster, riskier decisions. The prohibition of prostitution empowers abusers because it keeps victims from having any recourse. It is a barrier to safety practices such as working together. It exacerbates all of the harm that can be caused by prostitution. It's also the reason I am speaking to you today instead of my friend to speak for herself. This proposed amendment is not designed to benefit the marginalized women of our communities, but rather the property owners in the gentrifying neighborhoods where they work, who want them out of sight and out of mind, as we hear at a lot of these local meetings. This vaguely worded amendment, which does not make a distinction between sex work and sex trafficking, will further bring harm to some of the most vulnerable women in our city by making their work more dangerous and punishing them and pushing them further outside of the city, away from resources, and further underground. I've also submitted written testimony on behalf of my friend. I hope you will take her words and research into consideration. And thank you again to Councilwoman Brown and Emily. I did not get your last name. Thank you.
Mr. Burke, thank you very much, and looking forward to reading your written testimony. Also, we have this evening, this afternoon, Ann Stewart. Angie, do we have a Miss Ann Stewart? Pardon me?
I am checking. We have a call-in user. Call-in user, would your name happen to be Ann Stewart?
Yes, it is. Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you. We don't have you listed. You must have used the call-in feature, so I will unmute you. And Councilmember Brown, Ms. Stewart's on the line.
Ms. Stewart, please state your full name and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, council members. I am Ann Stewart. I reside on the city's South Side. My work on the South Side Substance Solutions Committee and the South Side Area Commission put me in the position to become informed as the prevalence of human trafficking in our city. I attended several meetings where community residents and leaders, both public and private, discussed anti-human trafficking efforts in other communities and how we might adapt methods on the South Side. As a result of those meetings, I attended community education coursework provided by She Has a Name. And from those experiences, I learned of the pervasiveness of substance use disorder suffered by sex trade victims and the connection this industry has to the opioid epidemic in our community. It was no surprise to discover the high numbers of sex trade occurring on the South Side, where we hold some of the highest incidences of opioid overdose. I speak to you today in favor of the proposed increased penalties to buyers of sex within the city of Columbus for the following reasons. 1, city government adopted the Franklin County Opiate Action Plan. One action item in that plan is to reduce the number of opiate-related deaths. Increasing penalties for buyers will reduce demand for sex workers. This may set a pathway for sex trade victims to address a major reason they are held hostage to this work, their substance use disorder. My hope is that by reducing demand, sex trade victims may find themselves looking for avenues to treatment, which will enable them to restore themselves in community. Number 2, city government is committed to comprehensive neighborhood safety strategies. By reducing demand for sex trade, our business corridors, where much of this trade occurs, may also be restored to a place where residents will again desire to fully utilize these parts of their neighborhoods, which have become blighted by the negative impact of the sex trade. Thank you.
Ms. Stewart, thank you very much for your testimony. Also, this afternoon, we have Seneca Justin.
Yes, hello.
Ms. Justin, please state your full name and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Seneca Justine. I speak to you today as a concerned citizen and an Ohio social worker, as well as a disabled Latina sex worker in the city. Some of my testimony will be a reiteration of the statements made by Emily Dunlap and the anonymous sex worker's testimony, so thank you to both of you and the speaker. The sex worker community is comprised of many marginalized groups pushed further into the margins by the stigma associated with their work, conflation of consensual and coerced sex work, and laws that aim to criminalize their work. CPD continues to say their goal is to find the root cause of behavior rather than assessing what barriers these groups are coming up across, contributing to the gap in access to resources. The stats regarding human trafficking in Columbus given cannot be seriously considered when they're skewed by conflation of consensual and coerced sex work, nor can the training be considered effective and ethical when it is being given by most, if not all, orgs mentioned by Deputy Chief Knight, as they don't take the voices of those heavily impacted by these laws into consideration. I have sent council a link to documents that have trusted organizations that have ethical and inclusive methods for reducing sex trafficking and includes those with lived experiences. The enforcers should never be the ones to recommend their own territory. I would encourage the council to reach out to the orgs listed as trusted experts, as well as look over how ordinances are actually harmful and create dangerous conditions for those being exploited. The resources also go more in depth on other places that have attempted similar laws with failed results. They discuss how placing fines on sex workers and leaving them with criminal records only leaves more of a demand for engaging in sex work. As Elizabeth Brown pointed out, while the hope that people will second guess these encounters is just a hope, rather than walking away, it'll cause sex workers to jump into the car quicker to save their client and themselves from detection of law enforcement, as well as change the vetting process and safe locations. Visiting locations will be determined by their clients without disclosure of their identities. Criminalization of sex work creates an environment where law enforcement officers and other officials can perpetuate violence, harassment, and extortion against sex workers with impunity. Oftentimes, the broad wording allows law enforcement to profile those who fit stereotypes, which often fit those of Black trans sex workers. Fear of law enforcement sex workers to work alone and in isolated areas allows clients and even cops to get abusive with the knowledge that they'll get away with it. Fines and criminal records force people to keep selling rather than enabling them to stop. Oftentimes, cities will use loitering and possession of a cell phone or condoms as evidence of trafficking, as well as more than one person working together, sometimes including driving them to work like an Uber, which causes more risky conditions for sex workers and raises the rates of STIs. People get really hung up on the question, well, would you want your daughter doing it? That's the wrong question. Instead, imagine that she is doing it. How safe is she at work tonight, and why isn't she safer? I encourage you to vote no at this hearing and enforce programs and trainings that align with the concerns of the community that it directly impacts. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Justine. If you can submit your testimony in writing, I'd appreciate that. We also have this evening Jordan Close.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please state your full name, any organization you may represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Jordan Close. I am the state coordinator with URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. URGE is a multi-state reproductive justice organization led by and for Black and Brown, queer, transgender, and gender nonconforming young people in the South and Midwest, which includes our work here in Ohio. I'm also a Columbus resident and live on the East Side. As a reproductive justice organization dedicated to gender liberation and bodily autonomy, URGE supports the full decriminalization of sex work. Law enforcement criminal justice responses to sex work are not only in opposition to our core values, they cause harm to the most vulnerable and marginalized workers, street-based sex workers, trans sex workers, Black sex workers, and other sex workers of color, while robbing people of opportunities for income and support in a system that often denies otherwise legal avenues of employment. To start my testimony, I'll start by defining some of the terms that I'll be referencing. Human trafficking is an egregious human rights violation involving the threat of or use of force, abduction, deception, or other forms of coercion for the purpose of exploitation. Sex work is the exchange of goods or money for consensual sexual service or erotic performances. Sex workers are adults who receive money or goods in exchange for consensual sexual services. State and local elected officials continue to dangerously conflate human trafficking with adult consensual sex work. Language matters, and how these terms are commonly used reflects the deep misunderstanding and refusal of some officials to acknowledge and accept the lived experiences and realities of people engaged in the sex trade. So-called end demand or demand reduction policies, such as this proposed ordinance, have been studied, and the findings reflect the ineffectiveness and harms of this approach. Rather than eliminating human trafficking and improving the lives of those engaged in sex work, which are the stated goals of the supporters of this approach, such initiatives have pushed people engaged in the sex trade deeper underground into more dangerous and violent situations and further away from community resources and safety. Further criminalize and penalizing sex workers' clients or purchases of sex has not effectively reduced instances of trafficking. Instead, penalizing purchases of sex has made sex workers more vulnerable to exploitation, and in some cases, traffic survivors were more reluctant to report instances to law enforcement for fear of retaliation from traffickers and because of stated distrust for authorities. This type of policing and criminalization of sex work are among the primary ways Black women, girls, transgender, and non-conforming folks realize and experience gender and racial profiling, police violence, and incarceration. The failed methods that the Columbus Division of Police has deployed, such as the Vice Unit, sting operations, raids, and constant surveillance of communities such as the Hilltop, East Side, and South Side specifically, have resulted in strained community relationships, violence, and the murder of Donna Dalton Castleberry, which resulted in the indictment of former officer Andrew Mitchell and the city of Columbus paying a settlement of $1 million to her family. These violent tactics have gotten the city national attention and criticism. Is this what we want Columbus to be known for? As Columbus City Council continues to engage in their Reimagine Public Safety campaign, the city's law enforcement-based response to sex work and human trafficking must be a part of this broader community conversation and future visioning for our city. Communities don't need more unequipped and dangerous police. Not all people engaged in the sex trade are victims and need or want to be rescued, as law enforcement and officials like to assert. City resources and efforts that have spent policing and criminalizing sex work could be better used supporting drop-in centers, harm reduction collectives, healthcare, and other direct services. I urge Columbus City Council members to vote no on this dangerous proposal and invest more time and resources in listening and understanding the vast experiences, needs, and wants of sex workers and survivors. The city needs elected officials and leaders to be willing to learn, unlearn, set aside judgments, and focus on policies that center agency, respect for individuals' choices, and challenge the systems that oppress and silence marginalized communities, not further stigmatize, shame, and criminalize them. Thank you.
Ms. Close, thank you. And again, if you would please submit your testimony, if you may, in writing, I'd appreciate it. And also this evening, we have Ms. Esther Flores. Ms. Flores, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please state your full name and any organization you represent, and you also have 3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Esther Flores. I'm the founder of One Divine Line to Health, a public charity that is out in the trenches, covering the 4 corners of our city, which we call the epicenters of human trafficking and opiate issues. So the reason why I'm here is just to give you a heads up. Our situation here in our city is not getting any better. It was nice to listen to some of my colleagues, especially Emily Dunlap, who understands the issues that we've been facing all along. The difference in comparison to other nonprofits or other organizations that are out on the streets, we are the only one who are providing condoms, Narcan, clothes, food, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And we were also the first one to have the full-time drop-in center on the epicenter of our city, which is located on the hilltop. What we need to understand is that incarceration is not rehabilitation. These men, guess what? They also have mental health issues. I have my own personal opinion, but I had an encounter with one guy last year, and it really broke my heart because he told me his story. He's single. He was depressed, and the only reason why he would come to Sullivan Avenue was to have companionship. Because not only did he get his sexual favor done for $20, but he had somebody who would listen. Well, what about if we look at options like mail drop-in centers and have John schools in those mail drop-in centers so we can address the issue that we're facing in these 4 corners? I know where they're at. Many organizations that try to do this work, they do it from 8 to 5. The real issues that we're having in our city, especially since human trafficking is tied to the opiate epidemic, is to be available during the crisis moment. just like the PAC. That's a good program, but why isn't it not available during the rush hour? We work the second shift. Sometimes we're out there at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at nighttime. And what we try to do is show everyone that we care. The real solution for these men is to provide the therapy that they need. It's a mental health issue. We need to be collaborating with people like myself, who is also a clinician, who is trauma informed and trauma responsive, to promote what we need. It's called love. That is the remedy. Love is we. Lust is me. These men are suffering from sexual addiction because they have some internal clock that is not working. Why? Because they're trying to figure out, or that void that they have, they're trying to substitute it with sex. Our girls are human beings. They're not commodities. Their body is not a sexual commodity, and we're pushing that. Stop locking them. And these guys, I understand that this is another opportunity to go ahead and make some money into the judicial system, but we need to look at other alternatives, providing the therapeutic help that they need, so that, guess what, their mental health issue can be resolved. So again, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about this. But the true remedy here is to work with people like me who believe in harm reduction and meet people where they're at. And maybe we should have mobile units that are John related, John schools that are mobile. Maybe that will help, because I know where the corners are at, where these men hang out. But at the same time, we also have to look at what is the real issue. They have some mind issues, and sometimes locking them up is not the solution. That is my voice.
Thank you, Ms. Flores. And the last speaker this evening is a D. Davenport. Ms. Davenport, are you available?
Ms. Davenport, are you on the line? Councilmember, I'm sorry, I don't believe Ms. Davenport is on the line any longer.
Thank you, Angie. With that, any of my colleagues who may still be on have any closing comments? I don't see them. So let me make my closing statement. In closing, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to my council colleagues for their presence at today's public hearing. It's been 2 hours, and your willingness to consider this proposed legislation. Thank you to tonight's presenters, Deputy Chief Knight, City Attorney Tobias, Albertrain, Officer Lawson, and Mrs. Carr. In addition, I'd like to thank Deputy Director of Public Safety, Robert Stewart, for attending this afternoon's hearing. Thank you to my staff and the City Clerk staff, especially Angela Burke, for helping facilitate this hearing. Finally, thank you to the community for your participation and engagement in the proposed legislation. Our goal must be to find an equitable solution to health, safety, and quality of life concerns raised by residents today. Moreover, we should strive to eradicate human trafficking from our community while ensuring victims are supported compassionately. I believe the proposed legislation and diversion program discussed this afternoon are a start to accomplishing that goal. Following today's public hearing, my staff and I will continue to receive comments and feedback from residents regarding this proposal and determine if there's a need to amend these sections further. Following that process, we will place an ordinance for first reading to be considered by City Council and my colleagues, and that will be accomplished at a later date. That concludes today's public hearing, and my thank you to all those who participated and for all those watching, and everyone stay safe.
Council.